the dice. This is it. High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Talking baseball.
The grand salami.
Willie, Mickey, and the Duke.
Welcome to Fed Up, the number one podcast where you can get up on all things Federal League. I am your host, Josh Stoll. It is the season finale, our last episode of the year. All good things must come to an end, including the 2024 Federal League season. It's been a wildly successful campaign by most accounts, but we can always improve. We're not alone in this. Major League Baseball constantly is evaluating the rules, evaluating their alignment, evaluating how to make the game better, how to make the experience more enjoyable for players, coaches, and fans alike. We are going to do the same today. It is obviously way too early to look at 2025. We're in no way, shape, or form able to make any decisions. I hope it's obvious this podcast is not trying to do that. It's not the goal here. The goal here is share some ideas, get them on the table, get the dialogue rolling. What do we like? What do we not like? How can we take an idea and evolve it into something that's going to work for everybody? And I think it's important to do it now. Start that conversation now. When engagement is high, the ideas are fresh in our heads. Get them off of our minds now while the fruit is ripe for the picking. So that's why I have asked a panel of baseball enthusiasts, some guys who were very active and contributing in some of the conversations on Twitter over the last week. Hope you'll agree that they are valuable contributors to the league, not only with their on-field performances, but with some of their ideas as well. Let's go ahead and bring them on. Very special treat for our season finale. We are joined by a panel of experts, we'll call them, for maybe lack of a better term, but they are some great minds in the Federal League. They are enthusiastic about this league that we have and are full of great ideas. So it is my absolute pleasure to welcome first-timer to Fed Up, Jeremy Salden of the Waconia Islanders. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Also my pleasure to welcome back Russ Bauer from the Milltown Outlaws.
Good to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Key contributor, Mr. Dan Pluff of the St. Michael Angels. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me on. I think I'm like the official co-host now over the last few weeks.
Taking strides, that's for sure. Well, let's. Why don't we start? Just let the league meet you a little bit. Maybe give us your 60-second baseball story. Let's go ahead and start with you, Jeremy.
All right, sounds good. When you asked me to start with that, I was like 60 seconds is definitely not enough time for, us old farts to go through that. But my baseball story is I've been with the Waconia Lakers for 25 years now. 2 years in town ball with St. Bonnie before that when I was in high school. Then the Islanders in the MSM ABA league. I was with them since 2021. Unfortunately, they had that dumb rule where if you played on the town ball team, you weren't able to play on the 35 team until you were 40. So I kind of had to wait for that to happen. And then obviously we came over this year. And then while that was happening, I was playing in the Fed, played 1 year with both the JTs and the Chaska Diamonds when the JTs that COVID year didn't want to play. It was kind of a funny story with that. I was playing with the JTs and I knew somebody in the Diamonds. And after the game I pitched against them, they asked me if I'd come over and play with them in the season. So ended up playing 2 that year. And then, so 2 years with Chaska Diamonds, 2 years with Red West Legends because I knew a bunch of the guys that I go travel to Florida with on that team. And then finally back with the Waconia Islanders and bring them into the best 35-plus league in the nation, right? So that's my story.
We are very thankful to have you and your perspective on, being a member of both the MSM-ABA and the Federal League and amateur ball. Certainly a lot of experience around experiences. So glad to have you. You are representing tonight both the AAA bracket and the Western Division. So lots at stake for you and representing some of your constituents. Russ, why don't you go next and give us your 60-second baseball story?
So played my younger days in Faribault. That's where I grew up. Played Legion, then went senior year in high school, played with the Faribault Lakers. So during my days post high school, played 4 years at Augsburg under previous coach who's not there right now, but Bateman's doing awesome stuff. Go Augies. But put in 10 years with Faribault Lakers. Then took about 6 years off to have kids, and in that process also moved to Northfield and played a couple of years of church league softball with a neighbor. And someone said, "Hey, you're going to turn 35. Let's start a team." And so now here we are. Just finished our 10th year playing Milltown Outlaws baseball. So baseball is greatest and done this. So yeah, that's kind of my story. I pitched my whole life.
I think
Somehow my tendons are still functioning in my arm.
we're glad it's hanging on by a thread, if nothing else. For our YouTube subscribers, you are very privy to the treat of Mr. Russ Bauer's background. He is an absolute baseball enthusiast and representing our AA bracket as well as the Southern Division teams. Russ, thank you for being on. Glad to have you. How about you? What's your 60-second baseball story?
All right, like Russ, been pitching my whole life. So grew up over in Maplewood, so played for Maplewood Travel Baseball till high school. Then jumped over to North St. Paul, where I went to high school. So played VFW, Legion ball with those guys. Played 4 years of college ball out at Army, West Point, whatever we're calling ourselves these days. So did that for 4 years, and then I hung up the cleats. I didn't play for, what was it? I guess 16 years. So had kids and started coaching them in softball, baseball, and that's how I found my way to the Fed. I was coaching a T-ball team back in 2021. Guy on our team, the Angels, Jeremy Cerisi, his son was on the team. He found out I played college ball, tried to recruit me out. I played hard to get for a year, but then I got the itch, and 2022, joined the practice squad, and they called me up to the bigs, and been here for 3 years now.
Thank you for your service, first of all, but also appreciate your candor, your humor, and your contributions both to the league and to the podcast. Dan, tonight you are representing both our A and B classes, and you are also representing our North Division teams. So do it well, make them proud.
I got this. Bring it on.
I think we can all agree that it's way too early to officially take a look at anything 2025. There is going to be so much change and so much that needs to play itself out before we can really make any kind of decisions. Obviously, that's not the goal here tonight. Anything that does come up for rule changes has to be, run by the board and then run by the managers and give a significant amount of approval to be able to be passed. But I think it's important just to brainstorm and get the ideas out on the table while the season's still fresh in our mind, and we can function when engagement level is high. Hopefully the community sees some of this and they can react accordingly on some of the ideas and share their approval or dismay about some of the conversations we have tonight. With that, I've got some rules of engagement for us. I want us to operate as if we won't have any expansion at all. So we're going forward with the 34 teams that are currently playing this year. We'll talk about expansion. We'll talk about what that could mean for the league. But as far as if we get into things like division realignment, changing the playoff structures, let's do it with the understanding that we're looking at 34 teams. I want to keep it in the spirit of the podcast. I do this because I think it's in the best interest of the league. I do it because I have a lot of fun with it too. But so let's keep it positive and let's have some fun with it. All right. So with the ground rules in place, let's quick get expansion out of the way. So it's always an option, but we never know who's going to come over, who's going to apply. It could be a startup team like Hastings. Could be, some more holdouts from the MSMBA. I know Luxembourg, Becker, Prior Lake, some other teams have expressed interest in potentially coming over. So that certainly is a consideration. But what are you guys' thoughts on expansion? And maybe we'll start with you, Jeremy, being unofficially new to the league with the Waconia Islanders this year. What is the league meant to Waconia, and how do you feel about expansion as a whole?
Yeah, so the league itself, like when we decided to come over to this league, it was just to get to the better talent, right? And I mean, there's other benefits. There's a lot more centralized in the cities area, stuff like that. But the thing that really brought us over was just how well this league had been marketed, how well the talent had built up. I mean, when I first started looking at 35, I said to myself, I'm never playing 35. I'm going to play town ball forever. I watched some of those games. If I knew that it would be like this now, I would call myself crazy and like, what are you thinking? Because right now, I mean, there's town ball pitchers, hitters in this league, and there's teams like the Mammoth that probably could go to state in town ball if they actually went and did that. So I think the league itself has brought a lot of excitement for new teams to come over. And I mean, my dream would be for basically both leagues to come on over, and we have just one united league that has basically all 35 plus teams in it.
That part of the criteria that the board does look at when they're considering expansion teams, where they play, what their roster looks like. I know that's going to be a struggle for some of the MSMABA teams that are potentially looking at playing in a more committed schedule. But, Russ, I think one of the sticking points traditionally has been some of the um, maybe we'll call unwillingness to travel a long ways. We've got a lot of teams that are fairly centrally located here in the metro area. Do you see expansion up into areas, we'll call them cabin country, right, up in Becker and Luxembourg? Do you see that being a potential issue for the league or the Southern Division in particular?
Probably would be. I think if you were able to at least dice it out in terms of divisions and keep, your close towns playing close towns and your rivalries like sticking together with that. If you did expand and go with a wider geographical layout, we would maybe need to relax a little bit on the cross division play potentially. I think there are some teams that are a little more willing to make that extra travel. Part of it also is what's on the other end of when you drive. If it's 2-3 hours to get there, if you're going to go there and play on some dog track, it's not so attractive. But if I'm going to go up, if it's a field like Waconia's or Dundas, whatever, that you're going to drive to, then absolutely it's worthwhile. You want to get there. Also, the quality of the team when you get there. You want to go play against some good dudes, and it's all those things that make it fun. So really, to summarize, I guess I'd say just what is it on the other end of when you get there?
Loved
The reverse has to be true too for us. Like if some team is coming out of Alexandria area or whatever to come down to play in any field in the South, what's their experience going to be? Are they going to love coming here? Are they going to want to come back again? So those are the things we have to do, is make sure that we're good hosts and also be good guests as well.
I agree
love
with
that.
everything Russ just said there. I just to jump in, I think everything he said I agree with. The piece that I would maybe layer on is, one thing I love about the Fed is just the culture, and Russ kind of alluded to it for a second, just like the quality of the guys you're playing against. I don't know how you assess that for an expansion team, but I think that's a big piece outside of the geography, the quality of the players. Are they going to be the kind that are chirping at you all game and just making it not a great experience, or the kind that just love playing ball like the rest of us?
I loved Tom Corcoran's comment on the thread we had going. The best ballparks tend to be kind of on the fringes of our geographical range, whether it's down in Dundas or out in Waconia, or out in River Falls. Sometimes that drive, that little bit extra time, behind the windshield is worth it when you get to go play at, just a beautiful cathedral, with a bunch of great guys. So, but I agree with everybody, in terms of you really have to consider, I think, Ross, you said it best, what's on the other side. I love that. I feel about, and so many times, the number of games on the schedule is dictated by the number of the teams in the league, how we line out the divisions. But how do we feel about the number of games as a whole? Is 18 the right number? Could we push that up? Should we shrink it down? What are you guys' thoughts there?
In the MSMABA, one of the drawbacks of that was we only had 14 game schedule. and every year 1 or 2 teams would either fold or forfeit on it, so it was basically 12 games. Some people that was fine, but like trying to get everybody on your team into a game that's just too few games. I think anytime you get over 20, I think there's teams that would like to play that because they have guys, this is their thing. I know like the Voyagers, they're a big team that want to play 20, 25 games, and most of those guys on the team, that's their main focus for the year, which is great. I love that culture, but I think most of the teams fall in that middle. I think somewhere 15 to 20 games is pretty much perfect, and if teams want to play more, then they can add those as exhibition games.
I agree. I like 18, Josh, and the reason being, if I had to throw any more, my arm would fall off. So please, no more than 18. Mark's going to try to make me pitch more. Please, no more than 18.
So I'll come at it from a different angle. I think we love to host people at our field too. We have pretty deep pitching staff, and as the manager, it's hard for me to keep all of my pitchers happy and keep them on the mound. I'm one of them too. We got some guys that I feel like they could have been on any other squad. They would have been an everyday guy, and they only saw like maybe 2 or 3 appearances all year, and it's like, I feel bad. So when it comes down to that, to keep my guys happy, like even the non-pitchers, all my roster guys, just to keep things flowing, keep guys interested. For me, kind of the secret sauce recipe includes we need, and like to start the year, we need to throw 24 on. It's like I don't think I would ever shoot for lower than 22 on our schedule.
I'm inclined to agree with the consensus of the panel here. I feel like there are teams that are kind of all over the map. Some are really stretching their pitching really thin to get 18 games in. Some guys like Milltown, want to stack them on, but 18 kind of feels like the right number to me. It's to Jeremy's point, enough of a season to get everybody reps. It's enough of a season to find a groove, and then for some of those overachievers like the Voyagers and the Outlaws, there's always the opportunity to add on some exhibition play, some non-league games that you can get guys reps, get guys in. But 18 to me feels like kind of the sweet spot. How important do we feel it is that the league plays the same number of games? I know a couple of years ago the South played a couple of less games because of the teams in their division. If we're talking about adjusting, if we have another team drop and we have an odd number of 33, or we add a couple, we're talking about aligning divisions again in a different way. Do we think it's important to maintain a standard of 18 for everybody, for seeding and for records as it plays out, or do we see that not being an issue and we just take win percentages across the board?
Well, I think off the top, if you start trimming back different league numbers of league games, you're talking league games, right?
Yeah, yep, ones that would count in the standings.
If you're going to reduce the number of league games for some versus other teams, then you're dealing with the number of required games for players to have to be in to be playoff eligible.
Yep.
So that's another topic we should also touch on, because that's a tough one to approach. If you're going to adjust one, then you got to start turning the knobs on the other things too. So it's a relative thing to start adjusting. I think you would want to be kind of uniform across all the leagues in order to keep a level board.
I would agree with that, especially with our current format of 7 divisions. I mean, I think we're going to talk a little bit about like expansion of the AAA bracket down the road here, but right now the only way to kind of get into there is with winning your division, which then if all the divisions play the same amount of games, it'd be fine. But then how do you determine that wild card, right? You play one less team, and those wild cards aren't playing each other, right? So, hey, if it's a New Market, Tonka Bay, like what we're kind of sitting at this year, they never played each other, and, it almost came down to it with that tie, right? Like if that would have went into a tie, New Market kind of would have got the default win, and how do you make that fair if they're not playing at least the same amount of games?
Russ kind of hit on it there in terms of you move one knob and you have to start adjusting other needles as well. There's kind of a ripple effect with every decision that is made. Obviously, some will be happy with a decision, others would not be. But one of the metrics you talked about there that might need to adjust is the minimum games played. How do we feel about that number right now? Currently at 6, and do we need to adjust the way that those games are counted in terms of being an official at plate appearance versus a full inning pitched? I've heard some clamoring on X for defensive subs or pinch runners should get a game qualified there too. How do we feel about the current standard in terms of 6 game minimum and how that's measured?
I like it personally. I think it's the right amount. I mean, I know a lot of guys on the league are very similar situation as myself. We're out coaching a lot of nights at the ball fields, and it's just hard to get there some nights. And, some guys are in different situations. They can make it to 16, 18 games. But for those of us who, only can get there a certain amount, I like the number. It doesn't feel like you can be a ringer and show up once or twice and then go stud out at the playoffs. But it also doesn't feel like a huge stressor to me. Boy, I'm going to have to miss my son's game to go out to get one at bat where I'm probably going to strike out anyway because I suck. So I think – yeah, I like it where it's at personally.
I agree with the total. I think you had asked about like qualification. One of the big things that I think was the pitchers, our POs. I have a few that are POs and actually don't want to get at bats, right? But they're fine playing outfield. I had one guy come to my game, Steve Milkey, who played the whole game in left field or right field against Rockford. Didn't really want to bat that game. But at the end of the game, I had to get him in and get one at bat just so that it counted as a game for him, right? And I mean, you kind of play that a little bit with you want all of your players to play. It's like, everybody's got the same rule. But if that person really doesn't want to bat, and they're like, well, hey, this is a 4-3 game, and now you're making me go bat in the 7th inning when we're trying to win this game and get into AAA. That's a tough decision to make.
Yep, I agree with that. That's a tough one
To
to be
play
in.
devil's advocate on this one, I think part of the reason for the official plate appearance or the inning pitched is because that's a tangible stat that you can measure, right? Not everybody's keeping track of defensive substitutions, right? And unless we're going to make people, start entering those, a pinch running appearance, so those are not really manifestable into the box score, so to speak. Any thoughts or comments on that?
I think that's the biggest thing. I completely understand that because, I mean, sometimes, you might not even get, the right name sometimes when you're doing the away book or whatever. You try to keep that up, but you get like their nicknames on the card or something like that. But I think a way you could combat that is if that person is there, that person that you're trying to get that game in for, you just say that at that game. And you make it clear, you either tweet it out or something that shows the record, hey, this person played this game right away, so it's not a question 2.5 months down the road, hey, don't you remember he played right field that game type thing.
I mean, another way to combat it, though, too, is we all show up with our, pregame, you exchange lineup cards, right? And you both have your book. And, yeah, sure, sometimes a guy will make it on a lineup card who is going to be there halfway through the game, or maybe he doesn't show up. But the previous rule used to be there was actually a drive-by rule. As long as you actually set foot on the grounds of that ballpark that night, you were there and you actually were technically that game. You were that counted towards your eligibility for playoffs. So it feels like the pendulum really swung in the opposite direction, and I don't know why that is. Like, if I think back to my 10 years in the Fed, I really don't recall any one stud that just showed up and just blew up the league. I mean, sorry, guys. I know some of you guys are really good, but I don't see anyone out there in the league that actually blew it up and you were the instant game changer that made your team win. It's all the teams that are doing really well. It's a team of 9 guys that are really pulling the plow. So it's, it really, it's interesting to see how far it swung in the opposite direction on that. And I do think that there needs to be some more of a compromise on that. If you look at town ball, the requirement is to be in 4 games, exactly, just 4. And all you got to do is go stand in left field for one pitch, come right out. That's it. And you're eligible. So it's tough as a manager when you got the scenario that Jeremy just highlighted. It's you got a guy that plays the whole game, doesn't want to hit, close game, and in order for you to make that game count, you got to get him an AB. And I know the way they're handling it right now is by doing some sort of a remediation process where you can petition to the board, and I think Tuff makes a ruling, and before we go into playoffs, we say, here's the list of the guys that, regardless of their stats, they can play. But, I don't think that's necessary. I mean, I think that the league is solid enough. We got guys that even if someone shows up having played, 10 years of pro ball, I'm not worried about it. Great. If they want to spend their arm and spend their body on a 35 and older game, that's awesome. I get to play in the same field as that guy. That's awesome.
Jeremy brought up an interesting thing. I never really considered this, but for those POs, I mean, I know I'm here representing the A's and the B's in the North, but as a mostly PO kind of guy, that's an interesting concept. Like, do we, set a minimum number of innings pitched for the season, at 21, so 3 complete games or something like that. So we're not forcing, like the guy said, a guy to go up to the plate on some of those off nights who's, going to hurt his team and frankly just not have a good time doing it. And it's an interesting thing to think through.
I think I'm more open to maybe minimum like that for kind of a specialized position. I might have to be a slight voice of contrarian to some of Russ's points with that I absolutely believe that there are game changers that can come in and influence an entire bracket, especially on the mound. And I think, transparency is definitely a huge part of, the spirit of the game and just having the awareness of who's eligible and who's not. I think you brought up amateur ball, only having the 4-game minimum, but they've also got some other restrictions in place there that shrink that player pool a little bit. The geography, it has to be within, I think it's 25 miles, right, of where the team plays their home game. And they also got contracts that they signed too, right? And I know we try to keep up on our rosters a little bit online, but there's a couple of rules that they've got in place that we don't, that kind of shrink that player pool a little bit. And I unfortunately wouldn't put it past some to bring in some kind of bracket changer, that doesn't meet that 6-game requirement that's coming down from Moorhead, Duluth, whatever the case might be, and completely changing things in the playoff spectrum. Touch briefly a little bit too on the current playoff format and the divisions and how difficult it is to qualify for that AAA right now. We've got some mixed thoughts on the number of divisions themselves. I'm going to table that again. We warm up here, but let me give you another topic that was of notable interest on the Twitter thread this last week. How we break ties in the standings. Tonka Bay, I know, was really vocal about making division games matter. Should division record be included in the tiebreaker? And then I saw Tom Corcoran mention going for runs allowed instead of run differential and discouraging the benefit of potentially running up a score. What are our thoughts on those?
I'll jump in with the runs allowed. That was actually something I proposed at the league meeting, but I think the appetite for any more rule changes by the time that I proposed that was gone. So I think there was a lot of people who may have wanted to discuss that at that time, but the answer I think I got was like, oh, we have that nailed down. And of course, as soon as that happens, then we go through it. But runs allowed is just, I think it keeps teams from running up the score in bad games, right? And that the last thing we want to do is have somebody, oh, we're up 15 runs. I don't want this game to end. I need to get 6 more runs today. Go up there and do whatever you can. Runs allowed is something that you can control that doesn't hurt the other team. So that's a big thing. I do think with the divisions, the way we have 7 divisions now, having make divisions matter makes sense, right? Like if we're going to keep that format and basically winning your division is how you get in regardless of really your record, then maybe that should be the first tiebreaker over runs allowed, because that means you are focusing on those division games versus you're not.
I agree. I'm a huge fan of both proposals. I think runs allowed is the right way to go. I think head to head should be always the first tiebreaker for a division, but second should be how did you do against the rest of your division, and then you get to the runs allowed, runs scored, run differential, all that stuff. But I agree. Make division games matter. Let's get it trending on Twitter, Tonko.
Sounds like the next big hashtag on the Federal League. Sounds like fairly unanimous support. And then, yeah, of course, Dan trumpeting the runs allowed, being our pitcher, one of our pitcher representatives on the panel tonight. Russ, any additional thoughts there?
No, I think they said it all perfectly, and I would support everything they said. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with the consensus here. I think, Jeremy, I think you're right. The league, the managers only have an appetite for so much change at one given point, and this last offseason had an absolute ton of it with the number of new teams coming in, the realignment that seems to be almost perpetual offseason exercise. But yeah, we changed quite a bit last year, and I hope that these are two initiatives that we can get to and champion and maybe I'll get behind because I think they're great ideas. I'll give us another softball, so to speak. 9-inning option. I saw Mr. Corcoran from the Mammoth. He was active on our thread this week, and I'm very grateful for him sharing his thoughts and opinions. I think there are some teams that want to play more baseball when they're making the drive. They want to get these games in. How do we feel about the run rule being 10 runs? I know there's teams that have very short nights when they go out and they win 10-0 in 4.5. Anything we need to do there to tweak the experience in terms of the run rule or potentially giving an option for playing more innings for a league game?
I think it'd be great. The league, again, this speaks to the talent in the league. A lot of games are so clean. It's going to be a quick moving game, and it's going to be like you're like hour and a half game just coming out of that quick. Like you could get a couple more innings in there pretty easy. So yeah, I'm in favor of more ball where you can. And again, a couple knobs that you'd have to turn if you did that. If you go to 9, where do you put your mercy rule and what do you set that at? I don't know. I'd be open to ideas there, but I'm all about playing more ball.
I'm going to represent the A's and the B's here and say I'm not in favor of going to 9. I think if you're a double AAA team, you've got the pitching staff most likely that can shoulder those extra innings. There's a lot of teams down in those lower brackets that just don't have the arms to do that over the course of an 18-game season. You're asking for 36 more innings. Some just don't have it. So I think giving people the option, I like how Tommy put it, give people the option to go to 9. But in terms of making it a mandatory, like all Fed League games go to 9, I personally don't know if that's the right idea for us.
Dan with the quick math there, 18 times 2, and he nailed it. Jeremy, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm indifferent on the 7 and 9. I can see both arguments on that. If you make that travel to for like Waconia going down to South or like a Rockford going down to Milltown, that's a long drive. You want to play baseball there, and if there's a mercy and you only play 5, wow, that's quick. One thing I think I could really get behind is maybe I don't want to get rid of the mercy rule because I don't think anybody really wants to play a game that's like 18-1 and play the 6th and 7th innings. But maybe make the mercy 6 innings instead of 5. Give it one more inning. A little compromise with that. But the option to play 9, I'm for that. I just think you have the what's it called, waterfall effect of like which games play 9. Oh, we were leading after 7. Did we get that win? Like those things kind of come up, and how would you determine it's a 9-inning game beforehand, and then now the umpires and stuff like that. So.
In terms of that mercy rule, going back to my softball coaching days, they've got kind of like different run rules based on what inning it is. And I wonder if there's an appetite for that in the Fed. And I know we haven't really proposed that, but I agree. If you're going to drive an hour and a half, you don't want to play 4 innings of ball. But I go back to 2022. We were playing the Loons, and we were down like 26-3 after 3. Nobody on that field wanted to play anymore. Nobody. It was like 103 heat index. It was awful. So I think in situations like that, having some sort of sliding scale where we don't have to just pretend we want to be there for 2 more innings, like let's just get out of here kind of situation. So something to noodle on for the future, I think, with that mercy rule.
Yeah, I will echo our sentiment from the 18 game schedule. I think consistency is important. So I think if we've got some teams playing 9 here and there, some teams playing 7, I think we lose some of that consistency. Makes it easier for some to potentially get guys to qualify with those 2 extra innings. Maybe the fix here is making it more of a common practice to play 2 non-league innings. Your official game would end after 7, no matter what. Whoever's winning there, the game's over. Maybe the mercy rule is kind of tapered down. Maybe it's 15, 12, 10. I don't know, 12, 10, something like that in the 5th and 6th. That could be a compromise. Obviously, we just lowered that mercy rule from 15 to 10 last year. I feel like that does get brought up every year, and that rule change did pass unanimously this year. So there was a lot of support for shrinking that down. But I would love to see. I don't see us ever officially going to 9 innings. Way to represent the A's and the B's there, Dan. But I don't think current leadership has an appetite for that, and I think it is just this is a senior game, and we have to, save some tread on the tires where we can, and I think that's an easy spot to do it. The more popular threads that was going on had to do with uh, I'll call it the schedule and who plays who. There was a promotion system being talked about quite a bit. You can think Premier League soccer, right, where you have classes of teams in the regular season, and teams would be promoted or relegated based on their performance. Moving from a triple A down to a double A, from a single A up to a double A, so on and so forth. What are our thoughts around something like that?
It's just figuring out the logistics of it is the big thing. The thing that I know from a town ball perspective, we have the different classes, and I know there isn't much movement back and forth. But one of the big things you run into is making all games matter. If you do have something like that, like, are you only going to play, if you're in AAA, are you only going to play AAA teams? If you play a AA team, does that game count? Does it count the same amount? Because you want to play that game, and I think the biggest thing is we're all competitive. We want every game to matter, right? And I don't want to get into a spot where we have games that kind of just don't have the oomph that it needs to have for people to want to win that game.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Whatever we do, I wouldn't want any games to not matter. There's nothing else to add to that other than you want every time you show up to the ballpark to be, equally important and count towards something that you're gonna go for at the end of the season.
The proposal here would be something around maybe you would play more of your games against AAA teams, not exclusively. You'd still play some AA, you'd still play some Bs, and they would all count. They'd all count the same. But now it's where's your 18 games coming from, rather than playing, rather than playing the 2 sets of divisional games, and then when you're playing your cross divisional games, are you playing similar talent? Are you playing down a couple of levels? I think there is you're trying to get a little bit more particular about who's playing who when they're not playing their divisional games.
Yeah, I think you could do something like NFL does where they match up the top teams instead of having like that third division that you play, right? You play your division twice, and then you play like your companion division once, and then a third one. Maybe you do something where you were first last year and you play all of the first teams from the other divisions, and all the seconds play the seconds type thing. Could do something like that. My only worry with that is then, does that make it easier for a team to jump up because the level of play that they played was easier, and they bypass you in the standings, right? Like, especially in let's say a Burnsville Hastings or a Newmarket Lakeville scenario where it was only like a 1-game difference between the two teams.
Absolutely. Yeah. If the Minnetonka Saints go 10-8, only playing AAA teams next year, would the Milltown Outlaws, who played a predominantly AA schedule, and they went 12-6, would they leap them to go to the AAA? That's definitely a huge consideration when evaluating that format. Large number of, I would call them, disgruntled members of the league pointed out towards some of the playoff sites that were this year. Uh, we had some late adjustments. I'm not sure exactly. I don't have the full amount of details on what happened to Delano or why that got changed. The board does plan to meet in the coming weeks to discuss some of that. Obviously, a situation we never want to happen again. But what are our thoughts on how the playoff sites should be structured to really get a sense of community and get as many teams as we can together in a weekend? Any thoughts around some of that and geographical considerations for the playoffs?
I've always thought that it would be nice to piggyback on what amateur ball is doing. So every year that they're hosting it wherever they are, the next year the Fed should have it there. Because all of the improvements and everything that they're doing to improve that park, the surface, everything about it, it's still going to be there the next year. And everything about that experience is going to be gorgeous. So if we have the opportunity to follow that and do it the next year, that'd be great. I think there are going to be some locations that are going to be a little far out, but like this year, Belle Plaine, Jordan, that's not too far off the beaten path. It's closer for a lot of us than Delano. This year, I don't know if it became evident, but Dundas potentially could have hosted some games, but we at least got the one of the days in. We kind of helped out there, but we probably could have done a little more. So it probably comes down to communication and coordination. And I think historically, the Fed has always kind of struggled in this area for planning and coordination of postseason because number one, it's an issue of logistics and fields. I think honestly, Delano has always worked just because when they're not hosting state, it's going to be open. They got nothing else going on out there that weekend, unless their team is still, if the way things fall, if they're still needing to play an amateur game there. But I think that's what it comes down to is having coordination, getting things on calendars, and kind of the meat grinder of trying to find out which fields you can actually book and actually keep that reservation held on that specific weekend, because there's so much going on baseball fields in Minnesota in that like 3 and 4 week period of time. It's just tough. But I think it's probably going to be a safe bet if you were to kind of trail around where the amateur tournament is going and go to where it was the next year.
Great idea. I think it presents, yeah, like you said, some additional challenges. I don't see the fine folks in Jordan giving this league any access to the mini Met, as beautiful as that park is. Just some of the we'll call them fractured relationships that exist there between the two leagues. But it's a great idea in theory. I personally love Delano. The fact that we have two fields right there, and you can get at any time. You've got the 4 teams playing and the 4 teams about to play. So you've got 8 teams that are in one site that are enjoying a parking lot together afterwards. I love that thought. Anything additional that we want to say on this?
I would just throw out everything Russ said. I agree with. The other thing I would say is just a vetting of those sites, right? So just making sure we're going to, I think for playoffs, so by then we're talking August. A lot of the youth sports are done. There's not as much, from a family standpoint going on. I think guys are willing to drive a little further. So if it means you got to drive an extra 20 minutes to get to a really nice park, let's do it. I mean, speaking for that A group, we were in Delano a couple years ago. That other field, I don't even know what it's called, not the nice one, the other one, that mound was beyond bad. It was downright dangerous to throw on. I almost threw a tennis shoe on my left foot because the landing surface was so bad. So I just think having some eyes on to make sure that, this is a proper playing surface for a playoff game is another thing we want to consider.
Yep, agreed.
One thing a little unrelated to this is, and I don't know if I've seen it out there, but was trying to figure out with like umpires and stuff like that is, do we need to stay on a weekend only type thing? And I know that's counter to, hey, get everybody in. And I think you can still have that, maybe championship weekend. I think somebody suggested championship weekend, but maybe do some weeknight games in the playoffs before that championship weekend. So the one thing that I like is I actually like going to other games on other nights when I'm not playing, right? And when you have all those games playing, and I know we had multiple sites, I really can only see the games that are, related to me. Maybe I can't go see a Voyager game or something like that. And having it spread out a little bit more would be great. Not enough that you can just ride one pitcher. I know Grill's going to probably pitch every game anyways, but for the rest of us, I like to see it where we get into the second and third pitchers on teams. But something just to make it easier on umpires and getting players to other fields on other nights.
Yeah, I like that idea too, to get that first round or two out of the way, like during the week. I think that it kind of reckons what we do with amateur ball. So that's probably where some of that's coming from. I guess I like that. So I'll show my hand here on where I stand on some of the postseason bracket stuff too. And this probably comes from my amateur ball days, and it's probably not so friendly to the B's and A's. But I would personally like to do away with all the different breakouts of brackets. Like, I would love to just be one big bracket, or possibly even two. But in order to get there, you would need to do those weeknight games. And you could do, like amateur, you've got your play-in series, you got your play-in games. You could knock all those out at outstate hosted games, just the fields that we play on all year. And then you don't have this flood rush of everyone needing to play on these specific three fields on these 2 weekends. Like, get them out of the way during the week, and then for the teams that do make it to those final rounds, maybe the teams that got knocked out will go watch and help out or do whatever. But a little more emphasis on like the actual championship weekend instead of the weeding out of the teams that, let's be honest, like once you lose that first game in postseason, it's an uphill climb. And while some teams do it, I mean, we saw Newmarket, they came back. It's a tough battle to get over it once you get that first loss in the playoffs. So I almost, Class C with the amateur, it's a one and done when you're in that tourney. So all the emphasis is on your next game and that game only. So, I mean, that's kind of nice. I like that. In the spirit of Federal League, I know that that's not exactly what we're doing, but because if we weren't doing that, then we wouldn't have the A's and the B bracket, and it does feel good for some teams to come away with some hardware at the end of the season. So I do see a need to have maybe a second bracket. So that's my bleeding heart there. But in all honesty, I would love to just have, your big group of the people that opt in to the big boy at the end of the season. Let's just throw them all in one big bracket and let's see who comes out at the top.
To
All
unpack
right,
there.
I'm gonna speak for the A's and the B's. Then I disagree, Mr. Russ Bauer. You got better swag than my team, but I'm gonna have to disagree. Just from speaking for the A's and the B's, you throw some of us against a Minoka, Lakeville, and East Metro. That's not an enjoyable experience, right? Like, we just know walking into the park. Some of our teams. Say it again. Sorry, Josh.
For either team, that's not an enjoyable experience.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just a throwaway game for that top seed, and for the other team, you're just a sacrificial lamb. That I don't know. It just feels that's one thing I love about the Fed is the opportunity to, at the end of the season, play a bunch of games against really equally matched teams. Josh probably studied the box scores more than I did, but there was a lot of 1 and 2 run games in the playoffs, and those are fun. I don't care if you're in the B, the A, or the AAA, or really anywhere in between, right? Just the adrenaline of you're in the 7th inning, it's a 1-run game, you got to run around base, man, that's fun. So I just think there's something to that I think would definitely diminish for a lot of players and a lot of teams if we went to a 1 bracket. So I like your idea of maybe going to a 2, lump the AA, AAA. I mean, those teams, any of those AA teams are, on any given night can beat any AAA team. And the same can be said for the Bs and the As, right? So, there's a lot of good ball players on all those teams that can change a game. So I think 2 brackets would make more sense than just 1 if we ever went away from like a 4 bracket type system.
Absolutely a lot to unpack there. Backing up to talking about playing games potentially on the weekdays. I think there's some pros and cons to doing that. I think by and large, people's abilities to make the games themselves probably expands on the weekends. Coming into it knowing that you're going to be playing that first and second weekend in August. You can plan your vacations kind of around knowing that your games are going to be on those dates, I think is another advantage. On the flip side, being able to go and watch other games, I think is awesome experience adder. And it would be a lot easier to book umpires if we were able to stagger games in terms of doing some during the week. Because when we get down to the dog days of August here, there's a lot of competition for those boys in blue. NBA is ramping up. There's other tournaments, and we really have to be really proactive with our scheduling in order to stay competitive booking umpires. So a lot of considerations when it comes down to, and that's not even to mention the competitive balance of the bracket, right? Like in the AAA this year, if you made that second weekend, you were playing on Friday night, and to get back and win the championship, you had to win 5 games on that second weekend. Whereas in the AA and below, those teams only had to win 4 that second weekend. So keeping that competitive balance, making sure that it's, I agree with Jeremy, getting down to those second, third, maybe even fourth, pitchers on the roster, and making sure that somebody can't breeze through with one great arm. I think is important, and making sure that we structure the brackets and the games themselves accordingly. We're to push for moving our playoffs back a week, maybe 2, from that first and second week in August to maybe the second and third, or third and fourth. There's obviously, as we're experiencing right now, a lot of great weather at the end of August. And I know when we're playing the Hickory, we're like, boy, it's still great baseball weather. Here we are in the middle of September. What are you guys' thoughts on potentially expanding the length of the season, maybe giving teams more of a chance to schedule those 18 games, spreading that out a little bit, and playing our playoffs later in the calendar year?
100%. I already backloaded my schedule. I think 70% of our games were after mid-June. Most of my players are coaches. Metro Ball and stuff like that is taking up May and June, and getting them to the park in that time was tough. So I backloaded everything in June or in July for them to get there and play those games. And I'm bored right now. I want to play baseball right now. So I think pushing it back. I think if you do that, though, back to my comment about playing during the week, one thing that I think a lot of people, when they are coaching, they know that the August weekends are the weekends that they can get away before school starts. So that's why I kind of try to avoid those weekends, and would like to have a little bit of a balance of maybe playing weeknights during that time.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100% too. That if we could push this back, there's no reason to be putting our postseason tourney competing with the amateur, for all the guys that are umpiring and time and all that stuff, like the fields. If we can adjust this and go back 2 or 3 weeks, let's do that. It would allow us to get those 24 to 26 games in, right?
There you go. I kind of like that idea of maybe starting your year with 4 to 5 non-league games, almost playing like a preseason schedule, right? And doing that in April and May, and then having enough time to get your 18 games in starting, the beginning of June, maybe just after Memorial Day, and being able to get, the majority of them in after the 4th of July break. Moving the playoffs back could potentially allow some teams to structure their year that way. We hit a little bit on potentially condensing 4 brackets down to another number, 3, 2, whatever it might be. Um, one way to do that, and one very talked about topic of conversation on Twitter this week, was expanding the AAA. What are our thoughts there? Do more teams belong in that bracket? Do we want to see more teams competing for the top prize? And please, as our A and B representative, Dan, make sure you represent what that could potentially mean for some of the lower playoff brackets.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. So again, I'm representing the A's and the B's, so not in consideration for the AAA. But one of the ideas I saw floated this week out on the Twitter was, the B bracket right now is the biggest one. Flip flop that with the AAA, right? So the AAA should be the biggest one, so you give more teams an opportunity to go for the big prize, and the B would shrink and kind of go to that 8-team format. I think that's a good idea. I think having one wild card team, that's just not enough. There's way too many good teams that belong in that AAA that didn't get in. So I'm all for, kind of shrinking down that A and the B if needed to make more room for the teams that deserve to be in that AAA bucket.
I agree with it too. I think just with 7 divisions and you're guaranteeing that spot, we ended up getting the last spot out of a division win with a 12-6 record, or yeah, I think that's what it was. But I mean, at the end of the year, I wasn't looking at anybody else's record other than Rockford, because I knew that the only way I was getting in was Rockford if we beat Rockford. So it kind of took away a little bit of that, right? Our only games that we mattered were those Rockford games, and I still like that division games matter. But I mean, if you're thinking Tonka Bay, they they didn't have they had most of their roster against us, but that should have been a big game with us. Basically, whoever won that Tonka Bay Waconia game at our field late in the year was going to AAA. We were going to probably not make it. Rockford would, and if they win it, they beat out the Saints. So definitely expanding the wild card into it and allowing the Burnsvilles, the South Metro Saints. There was a bunch of teams that were like 1 or 2 games away from making that bracket.
Yeah. Are not unique in debating this for our league. I mean, we've seen MLB recently, add a couple of wild cards to their postseason. You see the college football playoff. There's always talk about expanding that. Now I think they're up to 12 teams in that conversation. And you know what will happen when they expand to 12 is as they'll make the push the next year for up to 16. But I went ahead and ran some numbers in preparation for this conversation. Our double A teams this year against the triple A, if we were to include all 16 teams in that conversation, those teams were 7-28 against the triple A. So I think one of the comments on Twitter was, nobody wants to see a 16 seed steamrolled by a 1 seed. But those games, the average run differential was still just 3.5, a little bit less than 3.5. So those weren't. There were instances of blowouts. There were teams that got dimed in that process, but I think the numbers bear out that the top 12 teams for sure belong in that conversation and are totally capable of rocking an upset, winning a couple of the games, maybe even being the Cinderella story that would run through a championship in that AAA. So that means our football team this year would have been the Burnsville Bulldogs, who I think are definitely a team that is capable of going toe to toe, and they proved it out with Hastings and the Mammoth, and they've been in some really close games all year long. And I think they definitely could and should be considered as part of that conversation. I think if you ask those next 5 teams in the Double A if they wanted to play in the Triple A, I know South Metro would say they did. I know Tonka Bay would say they wanted to play in that. I know Burnsville wanted to play in that. I know the fifth seed, the Apple Valley A's, definitely would have loved to have been in the AAA conversation. I think 12 is a great number. I think it really lends out well for a bracket. Maybe you give the top four seeds a bye. Now you've got 5 wild cards. So there's almost a play-in round that would then shrink it down to 8. But then you have the back end to worry about, in terms of what this looks like down in the B's, right? So if we did 12 this year and we kept the next level at 8 and the next level at 8, that means we have just 5 teams competing in that B bracket. And now that's taking away a little bit from that experience. Any comments there from our B representative and in terms of what that could look like?
Yeah, so back to one of our ground rules, you said don't assume expansion, right? So in that situation, if there's only 5 in the B, I would vote personally to just lump the A and the B together, make it one big A bracket. You got 13 teams, and I said it a few minutes ago. There's some teams that were in the B this year that are good ball clubs. They may not have a great pitcher for a certain number of nights during the year, but come playoff time, they're as good as anyone, right? So I think all those teams can compete with anybody in the A, no doubt. So I think barring expansion, just make it one big bracket. If we do have a few teams enter and you get up to, 7, 8 plus teams for that B, we can always slice them back out. But yeah, having a 5-team B bracket just feels a little too light to me. You wouldn't get enough games and enough kind of new teams to play against to make it that exciting.
I think if you go to 12 teams in the AAA, you just do 12, 12, and 10 then, right? And you could do three AAA, double A, single A. And I think the biggest drawback is how do you do the double elimination or whatever with the extra games? Maybe that adds more games and makes it even more logistically tough to umpire and get those games in. But yeah, you would definitely have to shrink it down to either a 2 or 3 bracket system.
Additional consideration on top of that is it happens every year. We usually have 1 or 2 teams that end up disqualifying themselves from the postseason. So that obviously that the number in whatever the lowest bracket ends up being is one that is going to ebb and flow even as close as a couple of days before the tournament. And then when you have a bigger bracket starting, maybe now there is more of a need, more of a requirement to play during the week. You're going to have more games that you have to figure out. Maybe we stretch it into a third weekend. But I do think that this idea of expanding the AAA and potentially the bracket below it really has some steam. And I know it's something that I will be championing in some of the off-season meetings. But I'm glad to hear that there's some consensus on this panel at least, and maybe on Twitter as well. But would love to hear some more from the rest of the community in terms of what they think of this idea. But it seems to me like there's an appetite for it.
Right, and I think also if you're giving yourself a little extra runway to land at the end of the season with a couple extra weeks, teams can get those other games in. There's more room to do some things to get all their games in. I can't see that being an issue for some of those teams to now make them drop out and not play playoffs. I think it makes more opportunities, makes other teams more competitive, and it makes a better tournament.
What this panel is all about is just getting the ideas out there and seeing which has steam and which ones we can actually pull off logistically. I think we're ready now for perhaps one of the tougher challenges that the league will face during this off season is what do we do about divisions going forward? Right now we have 34 teams, so we're potentially looking at some unbalanced divisions again. 34 isn't a great even number in terms of chopping teams up. We still have uh, the tough job of scheduling balance and making sure that we're preserving rivalry games and division games and making those matter like we all wanted to do. So, what do we do from a division standpoint? I've seen a push for shrinking back down to a number of divisions. What do we like there, and what are some potential ideas of how we can handle the new number of teams?
I'm going to take this opportunity to say I'm glad I'm not on the board making this decision because, yeah, that's not an easy one. Other than just plugging a team into Webster's spot, man, there's not a real clean and easy way to do it the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I agree. It's tough how to divide it out. This isn't going to answer the question at all, but I think a lot of my mind is trying to figure out ways to grow the league and get someone to plug in and replace Webster's spot, and to try to do it without it being some team in Alexandria. Like the South is just notorious right now. We've lost since I've been in the league. We lost Union Hill, we lost Webster, Faribault,
St. Patrick.
St. Patrick, yeah. So it's at a point where I want to do a campaign to get some of these towns around here to actually get some of the guys off their couch and play ball again. I've heard rumors about Cannon Falls getting a team. I would love to play at that park. So if anyone's out there listening to this, let's do it. Someone's got to run it. That's all you got to do. I'm sure guys will come out of the woodwork and play. You just got to have someone run it. But also, like Faribault, get a team again. Union Hill, New Prague, get a team. Like, there's no excuse. Let's just get a couple guys to run it and let's play. But as for how to divide it out, I think it is tough to think about until you get the teams that are locked in. You never know. There could be some surprises lurking out there that they're going to pull the plug this year. I hope I'm wrong about that. I'm knocking on wood, but it's a challenge. Don't like to see good dudes not play ball anymore, and we like to go play guys, and we like to have guys come to our field. So that's kind of where my mind's at. Like, let's just make sure guys still want to play ball and keep them interested.
No greater inspirational story about forming a team than the Hastings Hurricanes. I mean, what Nick Tuckner did there and getting a really organic group from that town together to come and play ball, and the success that they had this year. I mean, it just goes to show you that the right situation can be immediately a great spot to play. So yeah, I would love to see any of the towns you mentioned drum up another, because a lot of those ballparks are beautiful too. So Union Hill is awesome to play in. So yeah, would love to see that as well. I think ultimately, in my mind, I see the league as saturated at 40 teams with 8 divisions of 5. I think just the balance and the ability to line things up from a logistical standpoint is fantastic. Keeping our 8 divisions, having a north, east, south, west in both the American League and the National League, I think would just provide ultimate balance. Obviously, we need to be careful, for the reasons we've already discussed about who we add and why, and not just expand to expand. Ultimately, I think one of the biggest complaints I've heard about the 7 divisions was how just the one wild card got in. But I think we potentially alleviated that by expanding that AAA and making a handful of wild card teams. So I think that would all lend itself to keeping smaller divisions.
Geographically, I think Mankato, it would be one of those games that
Yep,
on the other side of it, you're going to go play a solid group of guys. You're
a
probably going to
beautiful
play
park.
on a beautiful park. Yep. So it'd be worth it if they joined. So I don't know if we've got anyone that can do an outreach to them and see, but there's only so far you should sell it too. It's just like trying to get a new guy to come play on your team. You can kind of push to get a guy to come, but I don't do any hard sells, because if you're kind of talking a guy into playing and showing up, when push comes to shove, when you need him, he's not going to be there. So you want teams in the league who want to be in the league, and I think that's the way the Fed should continue to do it.
Always rumors of teams joining. I think the biggest sticking point for a lot of those MSMABEA teams is they have now conditioned themselves for a much shorter season. And having the guys meeting the minimum player requirements, having the pitching, to be able to now go through a full 18-game commitment. And a lot of those teams are on the fringe geographically. If we're talking about Becker or Lux or Mankato, all three of those teams are really good at baseball. And in a short set can compete with some of the best teams in our league. But can they do it game in, game out, 18 games plus playoffs? I'm just not sure some of them can. And then when you add in some of the other challenges that they have, I mean, Becker doesn't have lights. That's going to be an issue. Um, some people might not like Lux's 240 to right. That's could potentially be a sticking point for them. I mean, as much flack as King Park gets, now we'd have King North. So uh, there's a lot to unpack there, and ultimately, all we can do is sit and wait, for the cards to be played, and when it comes to expansion.
Yep, absolutely.
I do think overall the league should take an approach of having teams enter and expecting teams to go out. I think we compare a lot of this to town ball, where you have a shelf life of like maybe a player has a 15-year shelf life for town ball because the shelf life for a 35 plus player is probably closer to 5 and 6 years, right? You have people that stick around longer, and I might even be more than that, right? So you're constantly turning over those players new, so you don't have the long committed team that you would have in a town ball. So just making it easy for teams to kind of join and replace a Webster when they fall out, or allow a Webster to come back in 2 years easily would be what I would push for.
That's a great point. And the last thing you want to do is have a team fold, add them back the next year, have them fold again, and there's kind of this, push and pull kind of, will they, won't they complete the season? I mean, nobody wants that. That I would say is not in the best interest of the league, but ultimately you're right. We want to be a welcoming place. We want to create opportunities for guys to play this beautiful game. And now with 34 teams and over 800 players, I think we've done a great job at that. But should always keep that goal at the top of our minds when we're making any decision.
Absolutely.
Ben, I cannot thank you enough for your time and your dedication to the league. I really appreciate your insights and all of your contributions to the league. You all make it a much more fun place to play baseball. Really appreciate having you on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
us.
Well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Fed Up. I hope you enjoyed that panel. I hope it got some ideas rolling in your head. But now I'm going to push it back onto you, the baseball community, the Fed Up community. Put some thought into some of these topics. Let your board members know. If you don't know your league president, look it up on the website. Reach out to them with your ideas, because I promise you, the executive committee hears you. They're listening. They're trying to do their best. They're trying to make an experience that is better for everybody. This isn't like the presidential election where there's going to be tens of millions of votes cast on both sides. This is an opportunity for you to make real change, make a real contribution to your league, your experience. So I challenge you to do so. As we sign off for the final time in the 2024 season, I just want to take another moment to thank everybody for listening, for contributing, for your words of encouragement. I want to say a special thank you to everybody who has came on the podcast. If you have an interest, if you have a story to tell, I'd love to hear from you. Obviously, I don't know all 800 some players that we have in this league yet. I'm working my way there. But I love hearing your stories. I love introducing the league to them. I will spend my off season brainstorming on how to make this podcast better, how to make it maybe higher budgets, what fresh ideas I can bring to you to make the season more enjoyable. Until then, I wish you and your team a healthy off season. I hope you get a chance to go out to the Hickory, maybe travel down to Roy Hobbs, keep playing baseball. Fed Up will be back with a brand new season in 2025 shortly after our winter meetings. Until then, stay healthy, and thanks for listening.
The Whiz Kids had won it, Bobby Thompson had done it, and Yogi read the comics all the while. Rock and roll was being born, marijuana we would scorn. So down on the corner the national pastime went on trial. We're talking baseball, Klazuski, Campanella, talking baseball. The man and Bobby Fella, the Scooter, the Barber and the Nuke. They knew 'em all from Boston to Dubuque, especially Willie, Mickey and the Duke. Well, Casey was winning, Hank Aaron was beginning, one Robbie going out, one coming in. Kiner and Midget Goodell, the Thumper and Mel Parnell, and Ike was the only one winning down in Washington. I'm talking baseball, Klazuski, Campanella, talking baseball. The man and Bobby Fella, the Scooter, the Barber and the Duke. They knew 'em all from Boston to Dubuque, especially Willie, Mickey and the Duke. Now my old friend, the bachelor, well, he swore he was the Oklahoma Kid, and Cookie played hooky to go and see the Duke. And me, I always loved Willie May. Those were the days. Well, now it's the 80s, and Brett is the greatest, and Bobby Bonds can play for everyone. Rose is at the vet, Rusty again is a Met, and the great Alexander is pitching again in Washington. I'm talking baseball, like Reggie Quisenberry, talking baseball. Carew and Gaylord Perry, Seaver, Garvey, Schmidt, and Vida Blue. If Cooperstown is calling, it's no fluke. They'll be with Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. Say hey, say hey, say hey. It was Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. Say hey, say hey, say hey. I'm talking Willie.